Hey guys, if you would like to understand how spirituality and dogmatic versions of religions, respectively, how they end up offering a totally different perspective on reality, and how these apparently similar and of course connected fields, how they are indeed very, very different from each other, I invite you to stay with me and to watch this video. In addition, after explaining these major differences, I will be diving into what I consider the most interesting topic by far, which is how spirituality can be indeed connected with quantum physics and how they share a very similar perspective on reality, and how at the same time fields that were historically separated and presented as totally different. I'm referring to dogmatic versions of religions and materialistic science and its philosophy, reductionist materialism, how these apparently opposite fields are indeed very similar and share major similarities and also a very similar perspective on reality. If you're interested in what I consider an amazing topic, I invite you to stay with me in order to understand this highly relevant and interesting topics. I just would like to briefly mention that before diving into the comparison between spirituality and dogmatic versions of religions, I will be also explaining what the concept of spiritual tradition and religion means, and also what do I mean when I'm talking about dogmatic versions of religions, because it's a very important idea that needs to be clarified in order to be able to analyze the mentioned topics. Last but not least, the last aspect that I would like to highlight in this introduction is that I'm covering, or I have chosen this topic because of course it represents the basis from which I will be analyzing further topics. I'm perfectly aware that I mentioned in the first video that I was going to offer you or to explain how we could apply the ideas coming from quantum physics to our daily life. I will be doing it in this video in a certain way, but as I have already mentioned, after talking with certain friends, I realized that there is a common misunderstanding concerning the meaning of several terms such as religion, spirituality, dogmatic versions of religions. So this is why I have decided to cover these topics, and I hope you will like it, and I also hope that you will enjoy it. Okay, so I think now we are all ready to dive into this interesting video. As an introduction, I really think that we also need to come very briefly back, guys, to the topic of the first video, just highlighting what were the implications of quantum physics discoveries, because there's often also a misunderstanding based on a comment that I got in the first video. So just to be clear, concerning the implications of quantum physics discoveries. So it has been already proven, and it's an accepted fact, it's accepted by any serious scientist and physicist, that there is no objective reality, that reality is never objective, and that it's never fixed. So the implication of this is that materialistic theories and perspectives on reality have been invalidated by quantum physics. And why is this such an interesting or such an important idea and implication? Because the theories that were used to say that spirituality couldn't be true because it was not aligning with science have been invalidated. Materialist interpretations and theories were saying, hey, spirituality doesn't align with us, and we are the most scientific approach or the most scientific theory. So that's why it's such an important thing. However, and here comes also a very important idea and detail. I didn't mention, and no one is really mentioning, that this automatically means that quantum physics is validating any spiritual philosophy or interpretation. It's not the case. We are just saying that the very tool that was used to say, hey, spirituality can't be true, can't be correct, is not correct. So, second, quantum physics is not proving any or all spiritual interpretations. What it's a fact and it's true is that quantum physics is not invalidating spirituality in its entirety, and there are also ideas in common. So before diving into the analysis, I need to explain what do I mean by the specific concept of dogmatic versions of religions, because as you have probably noticed, and as I have already mentioned, I'm not using the term religion. So what do I mean by this specific concept of dogmatic versions of religions? So I'm referring to the institutionalized branches of a given spiritual tradition / religion that impose a rigid doctrine, rigid morals, specific norms, rules, and rituals. These dogmatic versions of a given spiritual tradition or religion are characterized by prioritizing total adherence, requiring their respective followers to fully submit themselves to the totality of their doctrine. So these dogmatic versions, and this is the reason why I'm using the adjective dogmatic, they prioritize total adherence over other spiritual aspects, such as, for instance, personal discovery or personal spiritual exploration. I would like to highlight, and you will be understanding why I'm not using, of course, the term religion, because it wouldn't be precise nor fair, that although these dogmatic versions, they are part of a specific religion, of a given religion or spiritual tradition, they don't represent the totality, the entirety of them. So this is the reason why it wouldn't be fair, as you might understanding now, the term religion, because I'm referring to a very specific type of branch within them. So if you are wondering whether I have an example for you, because it might be easier to understand what I'm referring to, I will use the example of the spiritual tradition or religion of Christianity. While Christianity represents a religion, a spiritual tradition, there are specific branches within it that would be representing these dogmatic versions I'm talking about. So, concerning Christianity, what would be a dogmatic version of it? A clear example would be any institutionalized church, such as, for instance, the Roman Catholic Church. Why am I defining the Roman Catholic Church as a dogmatic version of Christianity? Because it's a heavily institutionalized hierarchical branch that has developed a very specific and rigid doctrine that imposes on its followers. This doctrine includes very specific and rigid norms, rules, rituals, and morals. The Roman Catholic Church prioritizes adherence from their followers, full adherence to the totality of its doctrine over other spiritual aspects, such as personal discovery, your personal and direct connection with the divine, and also personal spiritual exploration. I just would like to highlight that I'm just using the example of the Roman Catholic Church because it's the nearest one to me, and it's the one I'm the most familiarized with, because I was, as many Spaniards and Basques, I was also brought up in a slightly Catholic environment. However, what I wanted to highlight is that it doesn't matter the weight of, in this case, the Roman Catholic Church has within Christianity, it doesn't represent the totality of it. And in Christianity, there are also other interpretations and branches, often very different to the ones that are offered, in this case, by institutionalized churches, such as the Roman Catholic Church, that offer a much more open and spiritual interpretation. This is the case of Christian mystical schools that don't believe, let's say, in the imposition of a dogma, or that offer another interpretation of Jesus Christ and of the religion. This is applicable to any religion and also to Islam, for instance. Islam is also a religion, a spiritual tradition, and there are many branches within Islam. Indeed, with Islam happens a very similar thing to the one that happens and that I have just explained with Christianity and its institutionalized churches and these dogmatic versions of it reflected by the Roman Catholic Church. So Islam is also, as I just mentioned, a very broad spiritual tradition, and it includes dogmatic and non-dogmatic interpretations and versions of it. The hegemonic, and this is true, the hegemonic interpretation of Islam, the one that we all in a sense know or are aware of, it's very dogmatic, and it has a lot of similarities in its dogmatic nature, for instance, with the Roman Catholic Church. This hegemonic dogmatic interpretation of Islam imposes a very rigid and fixed doctrine, very rigid beliefs, rituals, rules, and also morals to its followers and adherents. And it's also, let's say, a branch of Islam that prioritizes completely total adherence and full adherence to the totality of its doctrine rather than other spiritual aspects. However, as I was highlighting concerning Christianity, this dogmatic interpretation of Islam doesn't represent the totality of Islam. It's just a branch. It's true that it's a branch with a considerable weight, as the Roman Catholic Church within Christianity, right? But within Islam, there are other non-dogmatic branches, and this is the case of what is known as Sufi Islam or Sufism. For instance, Sufi Islam or Sufism gives a lot of importance to meditation, and you will see just with this specific aspect the huge difference that there is between this dogmatic interpretation of Islam and Sufi Islam. Sufi Islam highlights how important it is meditation and to know yourself, and this is presented as a way to connect with the divine, right, with God. By explaining these differences, guys, I wanted to share with you and to highlight that, as you have probably noticed, I hope, with my explanation, that the field of spiritual traditions and religions is much wider and richer and far more complex than we have been often told. And it's much more complex and richer than we have been told by these dogmatic versions of religions. So I just wanted to briefly mention that if it's also your case, because at least it was mine, if you're interested, in a given spiritual tradition or religion, but you have always felt that you didn't want to be a follower of a doctrine because you feel that it's something that we as humans don't need. And if you are interested or even share or even identify with a specific historical figure or with some values or some beliefs, but on the other hand, you are also perfectly aware that fully submitting yourself to a specific doctrine or dogma and even becoming an unquestionable follower will never give you this, let's say, personal understanding of who you are and is never made based on confidence, I highly recommend you to read, let's say, about these non-dogmatic interpretations of any given religion, because they can be very useful and are, in my opinion, spiritual in the sense that they can help you to understand who you are, which I believe it's the very goal that we all should have, right, as humans and souls. So, having said this, I think now we are able to dive into the analysis and the comparison, focusing on spirituality and dogmatic versions of religions. Before explaining the specific definitions of spirituality and dogmatic versions of religions, respectively, I would like to emphasize that all the respective differences, they are rooted in a very specific difference. That is to say, in one difference. And this is connected with how each of them perceives divinity and reality. So concerning dogmatic versions of religions, they tend to perceive divinity as something external, as something outside us. Concerning their respective view on reality, they tend to view reality in a very similar way. They perceive reality as something that is rather fixed, as something that is divisive, and of course as something that is external, that is to say, outside us. In opposition to this perspective of divinity and reality, spirituality tends to perceive divinity as something internal. So spirituality supports that divinity, the divine, lies within us, is in our interior, let's say. Consequently, spirituality also holds a very similar perspective on reality. Indeed, spirituality defends that reality is a total reflection of our state of consciousness. Consequently, reality is never fixed, is always shifting, is very dynamic, and it's even seen as something infinite. Concerning these concepts' respective definitions, I will start by explaining the concept of dogmatic versions of religions. So with this specific concept, I'm referring to the institutionalized branches within a given spiritual tradition or religion that are centered around the worship of a specific divine being and that are characterized by imposing a specific set of practices, beliefs, and rituals. These dogmatic versions are characterized by imposing a unique way to connect with the divine, usually through their respective institutions and their respective intermediaries. Consequently, these dogmatic versions of a given religion, they are also characterized by expecting fully obedient followers and total adherence to their respective doctrine. As a result, they don't usually leave room for fully independent personal decisions about which is the belief or the practice or the ritual that you as a follower identify with. You are expected to comply with the totality of them. Concerning the other concept, this is spirituality, I would like to highlight that it is a more encompassing concept, not only than dogmatic versions of religions, but also than religion itself. This is the reason why spirituality encompasses indeed religion. Spirituality includes a sense of connection to something higher than ourselves. This can be God, Source, the divine, the universe, or just something higher, some superior force or higher than us. Spirituality is based on the idea that you can connect to the divine through your personal experience. And this is the reason why spirituality is primarily concerned with finding, experiencing, and embodying our true spiritual nature and our authentic self. This is the reason why spirituality can indeed be completely separated from religion. And it is no exaggeration to state that spirituality is even incompatible or opposed to dogmatic versions of religions. Now, guys, we will be diving into the specific comparison. I just would like to highlight that this part of the video will be perhaps a little bit faster or a bit more difficult to follow, but no worries, guys, because this part of the comparison will be, let's say, just an enumeration of the respective differences. And I will divide this part in 3 slides that I will be sharing with you. After this, I will be summarizing the key takeaways from dogmatic versions of religions and spirituality, respectively and separately, so that it will be easier to save the main ideas from each concept or each field. So let's start with the comparison of the specific differences. Concerning dogmatic versions of religions, I need to mention that they are usually based on obeying an external divinity and its representatives, their respective representatives of these religions or a given divinity. This is not the case in spirituality, and spirituality is mainly based on self-discovery. While dogmatic versions of religions are institutionalized and have a hierarchical structure and they are often community-centered, this is not the case within spirituality. Spirituality doesn't need to be community-centered and doesn't need to be institutionalized, and of course has no hierarchy. Concerning dogmatic versions of religions, they, as I have already mentioned in the introductory definition, they impose a specific way to connect to the divine. Indeed, they also tell you that the only way to connect to the divine is through their respective intermediaries. So we could talk about the existence of a monopoly, let's say, concerning the access to the divine. This is not the case in spirituality, because spirituality supports that there are no rules of connecting to the divine, and that you can even connect to it through your personal experience. As a result, within spirituality, there is no monopoly concerning the access to the divine, and there are no fixed rules nor norms. The last point of this first slide or page concerning the respective differences is about the different narrative that each of them has. Within dogmatic versions of religions, you are usually told that you are being exposed to a truth, to the truth, the absolute truth. So what you are being taught is usually presented as an absolute truth, as the unique truth. And you are usually also told which is the path that you need to follow. On the contrary, spirituality doesn't tell you that there's an absolute truth or that you are being given the absolute truth, nor a specific path. Indeed, spirituality supports that this is the very task that you have as a human being and as a soul. You need to find your truth, your inner truth, and by doing this and connected with your authentic self and your spiritual nature, your inner divinity, you will be able to know and to be aware of the path that you need to follow, which will be aligned with your essence. Moving on to the second slide of this comparison, guys, I will be starting by highlighting that dogmatic versions of religions, they usually impose a very fixed and rigid doctrine that also includes a fixed morality that their respective followers need to adhere themselves to. These kinds of morality, they usually make a very clear and dualistic distinction between good and bad, between good and evil. As a result, and according to these dogmatic versions, followers, by practicing obedience and self-sacrifice, they could try to overcome their respective inherent imperfections, their inherent imperfect nature, and their respective sinful tendencies that are also seen as something inherent to human beings. This is the reason why, in cases of non-compliance with a given morality, fear, the ideas of fear, also punishment and guilt play a relevant role. As a result, dogmatic versions of religions place emphasis on being a good follower, let's say, which would be based on the idea of being obedient to the doctrine, to the religion, the dogmatic version of a given religion and its specific morality. However, this is very different when we are talking about spirituality. Spirituality doesn't impose a specific morality, so that there is no room for the idea of compliance or punishment, fear, and even guilt. For spirituality, the most important aspect is to know yourself and to be connected with your authentic self. These two aspects, are identified, let's say, as the only necessary ingredients to be able to be acting positively, correctly. Consequently, spirituality places a lot of emphasis on getting rid of emotional blockages and fears, because these are the two aspects that could hinder us from connecting with who we really are, from being in a state of peace and in a state of self-knowledge. For spirituality, the key lies in being able to follow the wisdom of your heart, to be in alignment and to live in alignment with who you really are, your essence, your true essence, and as a result, be following your higher mind, which is understood as your infinite part. Moving on to the third and last slide of this comparison, guys, right? Finally, I would like to highlight that dogmatic versions of religions are usually future-oriented, in the sense that they identify heaven or hell as a place that you go once you have already died. Concerning dogmatic versions of religions' perspective on the universe, they usually hold an anthropocentric, geocentrist, and divisive view of the universe. More informally explained, guys, they support that the universe, or within this universe, the Earth or us humans would represent a kind of center within it. And we are, according to them, totally separated from heaven or hell. There is this kind of strong separation between these dimensions or these different realms. Consequently, due to this idea of being separated as humans, or our human experience, from other dimensions or realities, according to these dogmatic versions of religions, it's not very clear if we as humans can connect directly and or regularly with our dimensions due to this separation. However, this is very different within spirituality. Spirituality is usually present-oriented because they support that heaven, or this idea of heaven, which could be also identified as a kind of state of pure peace, joy, internal happiness, enlightenment, is an achievable state. So rather than viewing heaven or this peace as a place that you go after you die, spirituality identifies it as a state, so as a state of consciousness, as something that it's achievable, that we can achieve during our lifetime, because it's not a place, it's a state. Concerning spirituality's perspective on the universe, it's also very different to the one held by dogmatic versions of religions. Spirituality highlights that the universe is infinite and that creation is interconnected. Everything is interconnected and is infinite. This is the reason why the Earth, or us humans, are not necessarily the center of this universe, and we are not the only ones, neither, perhaps. And this is the reason, specifically due to this idea of interconnection, the fact that everything is interconnected, that spirituality highlights that we as humans are perfectly able, we can connect directly and regularly, let's say, with other dimensions beyond our physical realm, our physical dimension, our human experience. This is the reason why spirituality clearly states that everything is accessible to human experience at any moment. The sole aspect that would be determining this is which state of consciousness you have. After having explained the differences, now I will be summarizing the main takeaways and specifically referring to these differences and beliefs implications. So what is the logic behind them, and also what are the implications of, for instance, certain beliefs, So I wanted to highlight that it's very important to understand the implications of things. And this is what I will be doing now. I will be starting with dogmatic versions of religions, guys. First of all, I would like to mention that I have divided these two fields in two different types of consciousness. So while dogmatic versions of religions would belong to a specific kind of consciousness that I have identified, I just would like to mention that this concept is not mine. Of course, it has its role, within the spiritual world, but I think that they are very accurate and they can help us to understand things better. So while dogmatic versions of religions belong to the type of consciousness called consciousness of separation, on the other hand, spirituality would belong to another kind of consciousness known as consciousness of unity or unity consciousness. As you might have seen now, these concepts are opposed to one another, right? They're opposed to each other. Separation and unity. They are opposites. So let's start with dogmatic versions of religions, guys. In order to summarize their main takeaways, the main ideas, I have summarized them in two general statements or subtitles. The first subtitle that I have created is the following: external divinity, human imperfection, and the existence of a post-life heaven and hell. So what are the implications of these concepts? First of all, divinity is seen as something external, so that we are separated from God, from the divine. Humans, or our human nature, is seen as something inherently imperfect. So we are seen as being imperfect inherently. What does it mean, inherently? That is something that we won't never be able to change. This is related to the idea of humans being sinful because of our nature, right? We would have a sinful and imperfect nature. These two aspects are very important because they have very direct implications. These are the aspects that are used by dogmatic versions of religions to justify why we as humans need to submit ourselves to a doctrine and to an intermediary that usually belongs, of course, to their institutions. These aspects that I have been mentioning, so the idea of separation and the idea of being inherently imperfect, they also justify our suffering. So, according to the perspective held by dogmatic versions of religions, we suffer because it's our nature. And there is, for instance, I'm not sure about what would be the equivalent expression in English, but there's in Spanish a very good expression that was used to summarize this idea and that I have heard when I was little, and it's the following: La vida es un valle de lágrimas. So it's a valley of tears. So suffering was seen, at least not by me, not anymore, let's say, or not at all, but life, according to this framework and perspective, was seen as something inherently sad, inherently hard, in which suffering is a completely normal thing that will, let's say, always be there. The last idea that I would like to highlight is that due to the fact that you are being told, hey, there is hell, you can be punished even forever, this has a very direct implication, because this can make you embrace fear, either consciously or not. So fear may easily become the driving force behind your behaviors instead of internal wisdom, internal peace, and also, why not, happiness and joy and your passion and your excitement. The second subtitle that I have created is the following: dogma, submission, dualism, and separation. So 4 concepts. With these 4 concepts, I'm also highlighting what I believe are also the most important ideas within dogmatic versions of religions. So self-sacrifice, obedience, adherence, and submission are prioritized, are totally prioritized. This has very relevant implications. First of all, other elements that spirituality believes are fundamental, such as personal discovery, internal peace, accepting yourself, getting rid of emotional blockages. These elements are totally disregarded. They are not prioritized. There's another implication, which is the following. Due to the fact that you are being told that there's a truth, that you are being told the absolute truth, that this doctrine has the unique truth, a lot of divisions are created and drawn. And of course, this hinders these dogmatic versions of religions from being universal and from promoting peace and unity. How will you be able to promote unity among people, among humans, and peace, if you are saying that you have an absolute truth and you are saying that any human that doesn't follow your path is unfaithful or will go to hell or will be punished? Of course, you will be, in my opinion, or at least most of you, agreeing with this idea. It's hardly universal, in my view. And the last implication that I wanted to highlight is that, and I think it's a very powerful idea, it's perfectly possible to be an exemplary follower of a doctrine and a morality without knowing yourself. So you can be in a total state of disconnection. Maybe you don't know yourself at all, but you still can be an exemplary follower of a doctrine. Knowing yourself, having internal peace, and this self-knowledge are not necessary ingredients, are not indispensable, are not prerequisites to be as being an obedient follower within a specific doctrine and morality. Moving on to spirituality, I will be also doing the same that I have been doing with dogmatic versions of religions. So I have also divided spirituality into two main statements or subtitles in order to highlight, right, spirituality's core ideas, main beliefs and aspects. Concerning the first subtitle or statement, it is the following: internal and human divinity and the opportunity for a total spiritual awakening and experiencing heaven on earth. So with this first subtitle, I am highlighting that according to spirituality, by deeply knowing yourself and accepting yourself, you are able to connect with this superior part of ourselves, of our beingness, that is usually known as your higher mind. And by connecting with this higher mind that we all have, right, our essence, you are able to understand who you really are and why you chose to have this human experience. So you are able to understand that you are an eternal soul and that you as an eternal soul chose to have, let's say, this body and this body-mind configuration, and that you chose this experience not to suffer, but indeed to evolve as an eternal soul, as an eternal consciousness that you are. You came here to evolve, to enjoy, and to joyfully learn new things, right? So this is the knowledge and the perspective that you can acquire once you have connected with your essence, right? And you are in a state of peace. So the implication is that you understand that you have never been separated from the Creator, from God, and from other dimensions, which you can directly connect with as human. Last but not least, you also understand that you don't need to suffer and that you can enjoy this human experience and be in a state of total peace and happiness and fulfillment and joy, and be always in a state of evolution, but of positive evolution, right, towards this unity consciousness, this consciousness of unity. The second subtitle is the following: the only essential ingredient, raising your frequency by being your authentic self, your real self, and following your passion. So with this subtitle, I think it's already quite clear. I'm highlighting that at the end, the only necessary ingredient or thing that we need to do in order to embody or live in this state of peace, self-knowledge, and joy is being your authentic self. So we just need to be ourselves And I'm aware that it sounds quite simplistic, but it's really that simple. However, simplicity doesn't always mean that it's easy, right? Because very often we have fears. We have the fear of being judged, right? We have the fear of not being how people expect us to be. And this is, in my opinion, the most prevalent fear among humans, right? Among people. And that's why I'm saying that it's simple, but it's not always easy in the sense that we have a lot of fear-based beliefs. So this is the reason why, in order to be yourself, spirituality also highlights that you should never give up your personal power. You should never submit yourself to anything external to you. So any doctrine, any dogma, any ideology, or also another human, you should never submit yourself to anything and to anybody. And this is the reason why it's so important to overcome your emotional blockages and your fears. They are not you, right? You are not your fears, right? Indeed, fears are the aspects that are conditioning you or that are leading you to censor yourself, to hide who you truly are, right? And this is the reason why it's so important, not only to overcome your fears, but of course, not acting based on fear, because it would go against who you truly are. And if you go against who you are, you block, in a sense, your consciousness evolution. You block your life experience, your human experience, or positive evolution. And it's even the opposite. Acting based on fear, you dive into a kind of negative path of censoring yourself and let's say getting smaller and smaller, unhappier, and so on. This is the reason why it's very important to be aware of our beliefs and overcome our fears and emotional blockages, because they are conditioning us and they are going against our purpose in life and also our opportunity to evolve during this lifetime, right? So from this space of inner peace and self-awareness, it's when we need to act based on confidence and based on our intuition and following our heart and higher mind. And it's when we need to follow our passion and excitement, because this will open a new path that is truly aligned with our essence and beingness. So this is the reason why it's also so important to act on your passion. It's literal, it's very important. It's not a metaphorical expression or a catchy expression. It really has a very important implication and meaning. And the last implication, and now you will be understanding why I'm putting spirituality within the field of unity consciousness, is that once you live in a state of relative inner peace and based on confidence, being responsible for the totality of your life and your emotions, you start realizing, also by following your excitement and your passion, you start realizing that life is indeed a reflection of your consciousness. It's a reflection of your inner world. And once you have this internally, you start to experience this externally. And it's not that you believe, oh, life is perfect. No, you experience that life is really harmonious, that life can be indeed perfect, and at the end, you also realize that there's no need for humans' conflicts and separation, and you realize that we are all one. And this is the reason why I was also highlighting that at the end, by embodying this state, this consciousness state, and following this path and taking these steps that I was mentioning, you achieve this consciousness of unity, this unity consciousness. Now, guys, I will be diving into what I believe is the most interesting part of this presentation, and it's the subtopic that I already introduced in the introduction, or that I also presented in the introduction slide, which is this phenomenon about this unexpected pairs, right, concerning dogmatic versions of religions and spirituality, but also reductionist materialism and quantum physics. So Reductionist materialism and dogmatic versions of religions align, while quantum physics echoes spiritual ideas. I will be, with this title or subtitle, explaining the introductory ideas, and then I will be moving to a more specific or deeper analysis, right, of these similarities. Reductionist materialism and dogmatic versions of religions have indeed a very similar perspective on reality. They both believe that reality can be objective, that it has an objective essence, so that reality is in a sense fixed, and that it has, let's say, an inherent meaning and an inherent structure and limitations. Both perspectives, so reductionist materialism, but also dogmatic versions of religions, independently from the concepts and the different wording that they might use, they both believe that their respective frameworks are able to explain the totality of reality. And this is also something that they have in common, a belief, a core belief that they share. Concerning dogmatic versions of religions, despite I'm not denying that denying that they use some spiritual concepts or words, but they believe that there is a kind of objective essence within reality, so that reality is in a sense fixed, and that reality has its respective inherent limitations. It's true that these limitations are presented as limitations imposed by God, but these dogmatic versions of religions, they highlight that there are inherent limitations in life, such as, for instance, our imperfection as human beings, and also the fact that suffering in life is usually presented or understood as a phenomenon that is inherent to life, so that it's in a sense unavoidable. At the same time, reductionist materialism has also this same perspective on reality, in the sense that since they identify matter as the essence of reality, they also believe that reality is at the end something fixed and objective. And the implication of this idea held by reductionist materialism is that they tend to disregard everything that is not matter. But they still believe that, by focusing on matter, they are focusing on the objective essence, right? That will always have a kind of inherent and fixed meaning for everyone. On the contrary, this perspective on reality held by spirituality and quantum physics is very, very different. Indeed, both fields highlight that reality is something very dynamic, that is constantly shifting, and that it's even infinite. These fields, they both highlight that reality and its state always depends on who is observing it, so that it has no objective essence. Concerning spirituality's specific perspective, I would like to highlight that it views reality as a total reflection of our consciousness, so that it is our respective consciousness, so our internal state, our frequency, the aspect determining the reality that we experience. According to quantum physics, or let's say quantum physics has already demonstrated that our reality is energy at its very core. So the essential composition of our reality is energy. That's why there's this idea of quantum fields. And that reality only collapses into a definite state when it is observed. So here is also clear that reality is never fixed and is never in a definite state if it is not observed. So this is the reason why they have a very, very, very similar perspective, quantum physics and spirituality. Now guys, important disclaimer. So from now on, concerning this part of the presentation and the next ones, I'm aligning with a specific interpretation of quantum physics and quantum physics experiments and discoveries, one that views reality as a total reflection of consciousness. As it happens within many scientific fields, topics, discussions, phenomena, and discoveries and experiments, this is not the only interpretation there is within quantum physics. However, I find this interpretation the most compelling and well aligned with the mentioned quantum physics experiments and discoveries, and also compelling or well aligned with my own experiences and my own perspective. Now I will be focusing more specifically on each of the pairs, let's say, and I will be starting with Dogmatic Versions of Religions and Reductionist Materialism. So I will be presenting why these apparent very different fields, they end up offering the same materialistic and dogmatic and limiting view on reality. So the main takeaways. Both perspectives, they believe in the existence of a single objective and fixed truth, of a single objective and fixed reality that is outside us. And this is the very core idea that clearly makes both perspectives materialistic. They also believe that their framework is able to understand the totality of reality. And this is also reflected by how dogmatic versions of religions, they present their respective theological truths as something universal, as something absolute. In addition, and as a consequence of this materialistic perspective, both are highlighting that certain aspects of reality, if not the totality of reality, they will always have an objective meaning. That is to say, a fixed meaning, an inherent meaning, an unchangeable meaning. Moreover, both perspectives also disregard the fact, as a result of these beliefs that I just mentioned, they disregard that reality may vary depending on who is observing it. So they are disregarding or denying that reality may change depending on which is the level of consciousness that a person might have. Last but not least, they also take for granted, and this is clearly reflected by the fact that reductionist materialism and also dogmatic versions of religions, they believe or they talk in absolute terms about, their respective ontological perspective and framework. They talk in absolute terms about reality, and they are taking for granted a very specific idea that our human mind is able to grasp the totality of our reality, and not only this, but to explain the totality of our reality and the universe. The implication of this perspective that is offered by both paradigms are very clear, since they are saying that certain circumstances have an objective meaning, so they have a fixed meaning. The implication is that you are assuming that there are circumstances in life, aspects that you as a person are not able to change them. So as if you were a victim of them, totally unable to alter them, because, as I mentioned, they have a fixed meaning. There's another implication, which is the fact that this will inevitably lead you to a surrender of personal power, assuming, for instance, unhappiness and dissatisfaction, and even presenting them and treating them as something objective and inherent to life, taken for granted, or at least justifying your unhappiness or dissatisfaction with the idea that is something inherent, that you are unable to alter these emotions or this state of unhappiness, for instance. Last but not least, there's another implication as a result of these ideas and beliefs, and it's the fact that personal discovery within the framework of these perspectives will never be important, because How can personal discovery be seen as something very important and super useful if you are already assuming that certain circumstances, aspects in your life cannot be altered by you because they are fixed and they will always have a fixed impact on you because they have a fixed meaning? So this is the reason why personal discovery is either consciously or not, but it's totally disregarded and will always be, because there's no space for personal discovery or its potential relevant role, because there are certain things that are inherent to life, that are unchangeable. The following approach to life emerges as a result of this perspective on reality. The approach is the following: to act in order to have, in order to be. So it's based on firstly taking action in your external world, so to act, assuming that the acquired accomplishments, either material or not, so to have, will be the aspects not only conditioning but determining, telling you who you truly are, so determining your beingness, your identity, and your state, so to be. I will be giving you an example, or specifically 2 examples, so that we can understand what I'm really meaning with this approach, right? To act in order to have, in order to be. The first example is the person who is hoarding material possessions in the hope of feeling fulfilled, finding their identity, who they are, by these material possessions. The second example is a person that is submitting him or herself to a dogmatic doctrine and literally basing all her actions on this doctrine or on these specific ideas and beliefs belonging to the doctrine, in the hope of finding who they are, of feeling fulfilled, and even being saved. What I'm trying to highlight is that in essence, these persons are acting in the same way. It doesn't matter which appearance their life might have, they are essentially doing the same. Indeed, they are trying to find who they are, their beingness, their identity, and also their fulfillment outside themselves. So they are literally exiling themselves from the only place where true fulfillment and your authentic self reside, and this is within. So within themselves, in this case, within ourselves. The consequence is that they are literally condemning themselves to unhappiness and dissatisfaction. And not only this, but they will very likely also treat them as something unavoidable and inherent. It's very important to highlight that these behaviors always emerge as a result of lack of self-trust, self-acceptance, a denial of one's beingness. So when you deny a part of yourself, or when you fully deny yourself, and also a belief in limitations. Now, guys, I will be explaining what makes the perspective of quantum physics and spirituality so similar, so holistic, and also non-dogmatic. I will be focusing now on the main takeaways, as I have been doing with the previous perspective. So they are denying that there is an objective essence, right? As I have already repeated many times. There is no fixed reality. In addition, they both are highlighting that it is a subjective element, an internal aspect, what is at the end determining our perspective on reality as humans, as individuals. Quantum physics talks and highlights and has already demonstrated the fundamental observer dependence and the so-called wave function collapse. And spirituality has always highlighted that reality is a total reflection of our consciousness, of our inner state. Their respective frameworks are uniquely equipped, let's say, to naturally assume and accept and also understand why people perceive reality differently, since they are saying that the perception and the understanding of reality depends on one's consciousness or on which kind of observer you are, it's totally explainable and acceptable why there are people that perceive reality even so differently. Since there are different observers, since there are different level of consciousness, there are people with a different level of consciousness, they connect and perceive different realities. And this is a very interesting point, right? Because this is also why spirituality is not interested in, well, spirituality or spiritual traditions. They are not interested in imposing an absolute truth, because they are literally saying that there's no absolute truth, in the sense that each individual has a specific level of consciousness, and depending on this, they will perceive reality in a specific way. So this is the reason why spiritual traditions, they are not interested in imposing a truth. They are just highlighting and letting human beings know that you can always change your understanding of reality, and you will be changing your reality by changing yourself. Quantum physics and spirituality also have a more flexible and humble position and epistemological approach, in the sense that they are totally aware and they accept it naturally that their respective frameworks will never be able, very likely, to understand the totality of our reality, because this would include our whole universe, right? The totality of our universe. In addition, this more humble position is also reflected by the fact that they are not imposing a single fixed ontology. And since they are saying that reality is in a sense very dynamic and infinite, you can't have an ontology, a single ontology. And this is one of the biggest findings and interpretations that there are from quantum physics discoveries, and of course is the interpretation that I identify with. One of the biggest findings, and it sounds very paradoxical, but one of the biggest findings is that we should not impose an ontology, let's say a perspective on reality, or at least a fixed perspective on reality, fixing reality, because it's very dynamic and it's always shifting, and how you view reality won't never be the exact same thing as how an animal views reality, or how, let's say, non-human intelligence views reality, how a spirit views reality, And this is the reason why it's such a powerful idea, despite it might sound paradoxical, right? And in one of the videos that I shared with you about quantum physics, the one with the Dalai Lama, it was very interesting because the two physicists were literally explaining this idea. This is the major finding, that there's no fixed reality. So how could you claim that you have the perspective of reality and imposing a specific meaning? This is also a very powerful idea that is very present within quantum physics and spirituality's perspective or paradigm or interpretation. Before diving into the last idea of this slide, guys, I just wanted to use or to share with you a very powerful and perhaps more visual example for you that I have forgotten to mention, and it's concerning this last idea that I have been explaining. So the fact that our understanding of reality is constantly shifting is also the case even when we are talking about the same individual. So it's not only true that there are millions of human beings and each human being has his or her own perspective on reality, but also when we are talking about the same individual, this same individual is constantly evolving, changing and shifting, and her respective perspective on reality is also constantly shifting as a result of this constant evolution, right? Let's use, for instance, my case. I'm not the same person as I was 5 years ago. 2 years ago, 1 month ago, even yesterday. So the understanding of reality that I have right now, of course, it's not the same as the one I was having 5 years ago. And I'm going to say this humoristically, but it's true that I have the same name, right? But of course I have become a new person. I also keep some hobbies, guys, but of course I'm a new person. And since I have been evolving, my interpretation of reality is totally different from the one that I was having some years ago. But this does not mean that my experiences now, while they are real, the experiences that I was having in the past were not. The quantum idea, and this is the quantum idea, and it's easier to understand that we often think both perspectives were real. My old self was having a specific perspective on reality, and it also was having specific life experiences. They were real, right? But my current experiences, my current interpretation of reality is also real. Both are real, and this is the quantum idea. We are constantly shifting, and our respective interpretation of reality is also constantly shifting. Let's use a visual example. Let's use the example of a young guy that has always been afraid of making a trip on his own, of making a solo trip. Let's put that he has always had this fear, but he feels that it's the time to overcome it. Let's put that he has already planned to visit, for instance, Morocco, and to finally overcome this fear of making a solo trip. Let's put that he's already there and that he's attracting super positive experiences, that he's really having a wonderful time. So he could think that he's being super lucky, or that Morocco might objectively be a friendly and welcoming country. However, the aspect that I'm highlighting is that as a result of the fact that he has changed a belief that he used to have, that he has made an internal change, he will be attracting new experiences. He's literally entering new realities. So the external reality is just a reflection of our internal state. And this is also applicable to these kind of cases. When you end up attracting a total new experience that was even unthinkable for your old self, but you realize that you have internally changed certain aspects. And surprisingly or luckily, you are having a new experience. The aspect that explains this is that you have become a new person. And once you have become a new person, you are literally entering new realities. And it's not metaphorical, it's literal, right? So this is the powerful idea that I wanted to share with you. And of course, this is an idea that can be perfectly explained and understood through quantum physics and spirituality's perspective, but not with the help of dogmatic versions of religions, nor the perspective held by classical physics and reductionist materialism. The last idea that I wanted to highlight, guys, is that quantum physics and spirituality, they both acknowledge that our understanding of reality will always be incomplete, because it will be always conditioned and limited by the constraints of human cognition and perceptions. And this is also related to the idea that we are analyzing reality, interpreting it, building and gaining knowledge through our human brain, through our human mind, and that we are perceiving the aspects of reality, or the reality or realities that are compatible or that can be perceived with and from our level of consciousness, from our state of consciousness. However, this apparent limiting idea has indeed the opposite implication, or has indeed a very paradoxical implication, because it's the very fact of assuming that, or including the idea or being aware of the fact that we are interpreting reality from a very specific point of view. This can be our point of view as human beings, but also from our individual state of consciousness, assuming this opens the door for being aware and being able to understand that our interpretation of reality will always evolve, will be always evolving, because so are we. We are constantly evolving, right? And we don't know what the limit is concerning our consciousness limitations, potential, and our consciousness evolution, right? I'm asking you guys, do you know what the limit is? And would you also know when are we going, or whether we have reached the point of being able to claim, hey, we already know the totality of our universe? Of course, in my humble view, we are not at this point yet. And in my opinion, and this is the idea, there's in a sense no limit, and there's this kind of idea of infinite, of the infinite, because if the reality we perceive and the understanding of reality is a reflection of our consciousness, and we are always able to evolve as consciousness, and in this case as human beings, our interpretation will be infinitely shifting as well. So this is the reason why it is this idea, this apparently negative or limiting idea of saying it's a pity, but our understanding will always be incomplete. This apparently limiting idea is the one that is indeed, in my view, very scientific, very humble. And also it's the idea that is leaving the door wide open for further evolution, for updating our understanding of reality. And it is, let's say, the respective humbleness and flexibility and non-dogmatism, so the absence of dogmatism and of a fixed ontology, the aspect that makes quantum physics and spirituality able to understand the totality of our experiences, because they are indeed talking about this, the fact that the single state of affairs doesn't exist. So this is leaving the door extremely open. So now concerning the implications, guys, if you were to align yourself with this perspective, as I've done, for instance. So individuals aligning themselves with this perspective assume that reality is neither fixed nor independent from them nor external. So it is indeed your respective state of consciousness and your role as an observer and creator, the aspect determining your reality, how you perceive it, shaping an entirely unique experience for you specifically. This means that everything starts within and then manifests outwardly. So this would make you fully responsible for the totality of your experiences. This is also connected with the idea that in life, nothing has an inherent nor a fixed meaning. Indeed, we are always free to choose which meaning we give to a given experience. And this is the relevant power that we always have. This perspective indeed empowers people and makes them understand that either consciously or unconsciously, they have been creating all their experiences, the totality of their experiences, either pleasant or unpleasant. And they have been also creating, either consciously or not, and I have experiences as well. We are the creators also of our own limitations, in the sense that it's a product of certain beliefs that we hold onto. So we also have the power to get rid of these beliefs and experience new virtues that we might have. And it's not that reality has changed. We have updated our version and we realized that the beliefs were the one creating certain perceptions and experiences and not reality itself. And last but not least, this perspective also highlights and implies that who we are, our beingness, our identity, our self, is never determined by an external circumstance nor aspect, is independent from them. And now, guys, I will be explaining what's the approach to life, the life approach that emerges from the perspective coming from quantum physics and spirituality that I have been just explaining. So the following life approach emerges: to be and to act and to have. So the first step is based on self-knowledge, acceptance, and authenticity. The second step, based on acting, is based on the idea that you should be living in alignment with your passion, which would represent your authentic self. The last step, having, is based on the idea that possessions, achievements, indeed having, should always be viewed as a natural consequence of the previous steps, being and acting. Concerning the first step, being, I have summarized it with the following 3 words: self-knowledge, acceptance, and authenticity. This first step is based on the idea that before taking any action and even seeking external achievements, you should connect with your true self and authentic self. This, of course, means engaging in inner work, self-acceptance, and self-reflection. You should be able to recognize yourself beyond societal expectations and conditioning, and also fear, because this is how you will be able to identify and recognize your authentic self, who you truly are beyond these mentioned aspects. The second step is based on acting. So I have summarized it with the following phrase: living in alignment with your passion, thus your true self, your authentic self. This step is based on the idea that you should start taking actions and making choices that really align with your passion, with your excitements, and also your intuition. So instead of acting out of fear or external or societal expectations, which I think is something that we all have faced throughout our lives, and it's a behavior we have almost all of us had, right? Because we are very used to it. But this perspective highlights that we can break with this, and instead of acting out of fear or out of the expectations that, for instance, our family might have on us, or certain friends, or even society in general, we need to start making choices based on our passion and excitement. Indeed, actions and choices that really resonate with our inner being. Last but not least, and this is an important idea within this second step of acting, is the fact that this step doesn't imply at all that you need to have everything figured out. What it means and implies is that you trust that your passion, your intuition, and your excitement will effectively guide you and will be able to show you the path that you need to follow in life. Of course, a path that will be in alignment with yourself, with your authentic self. The last step, of course, makes sense, right, guys, is based on having. So I have summarized it with the following phrase. Having, it can be material possessions and also achievements, accomplishments, right? Having can be seen and is a natural consequence of being and acting. This step is based on the idea that when you are living in alignment with your true self, the right opportunities and resources will always appear and emerge. You will be able to attract them. There is also a very important idea that concerns fulfillment, abundance, and success. They are not seen as something that we should chase, but they are seen as the natural outcome of living in alignment. As a result, material possessions and also external achievements can't be the source of happiness. This perspective highlights that they will never be able to offer you fulfillment, joy, and happiness, because at the end, they are external, they are outside you. However, your inner state will be always reflecting, material possessions or certain things in your external reality. So, material possessions and achievements are not seen as the source of your happiness, but are seen as the reflection of your inner state. And this is the reason why this spiritual perspective and this approach to life, it overcomes and transcends dualistic thinking and the dualistic framework we are very, very used to. This perspective holds no judgment on material possessions and also external achievements. And within this idea, we also are able to identify the principle that I was explaining, that it's very present within the perspective on reality of quantum physics and spirituality. Things, they never have an inherent meaning. And so it is also when we are talking about material possessions. We are very used to hear that material possessions are either good or bad, right? Being rich in terms of material resources, it's either good or even evil, right? So this perspective overcomes and transcends this dualistic framework. However, it is just highlighting that it will always depend on from which space you are doing it, from which space you are acting in a certain way. And I will be sharing with you a personal example. So I have always been passionate about cars since I was a little kid, especially passionate about Porsche, in German Porsche, the German brand that for sure most of you know. I have always had this passion and I still keep it. Let's say it's a passion that has never faded. And being able to drive a Porsche or to own one or even just yet to be able to use one would represent and indeed represents one of my biggest passion. However, applying this perspective and this idea, what now I understand is that this will never be the source of my happiness. It will never be it can't be the source of my internal happiness, internal joy and fulfillment. However, what this perspective highlights is that from a state of inner peace and fulfillment, inner fulfillment, and also by following a path in life that it's in alignment with my true essence or my authentic self and doing things that I love, I will be able sooner or later to attract this or to have this achievement, right? Or to have this material possession, right? And it might sound a bit simplistic, but this is the powerful idea. And this is the reason why things don't have an inherent meaning. They never have a fixed meaning. It wouldn't be the same owning or being able to afford a Porsche after you have been following a path that is in disalignment with your true self. You have been suffering to obtain it. What would be the point in my case, for instance, of owning a Porsche and being able to afford it just because I have been suffering along the way? What would be the point? Would, in this scenario, owning a Porsche be something positive? In my personal case, it wouldn't be a positive thing because I have been suffering or I have been, let's say, disconnecting from my true self just to obtain something. And also assuming that once I reach this point of owning a Porsche, I will be deeply happy. In my view, and what this perspective highlights is that life, it doesn't work this way. And I think we all have experienced this, or we all have examples that perfectly reflect this. You know, happiness depends on your inner state, and it's literal. So I guess and I hope that with this example, you have been able to deeply understand what was the idea that I was explaining concerning material possessions and external achievements, because we have been raised with a dualistic framework, and it doesn't matter if you are on a specific extreme of the framework or on the other one. We are very used to apply and to use a dualistic framework and a dualistic thinking. It's either good or bad, and the most correct answer, the most precise and accurate one, and in my opinion the only correct answer, is it depends. It depends on which space you're acting from. This is literally what will determine in my case, if owning a Porsche is a reflection of my authentic self or not. If I have been following, for instance, a professional activity that I love, as I'm doing right now, at least I guess you might be able to guess that I'm doing it. I'm doing these videos because it's literally what I love, and I think that it's the thing that is the most aligned with my passions, with what I like, with the knowledge that I have been acquiring throughout my life, and after reading books, it's literally my passion. So if, let's say, being able to have a Porsche, to drive it, is a result of the fact that I have been following my passion, my excitement at all levels, and this is the last idea that I would like to highlight. All levels doesn't only imply, of course, that you are following your passion at the professional level. It includes every aspect and every field of our life. So this is the path that I'm following, and I'm going to say it in a humoristic way, but it's also literal and it's also real, being honest with you guys. By following this path, of course, I guess and I hope that I will be able not only to be deeply happy within myself, but of course reflect this in my external reality, and why not also by having or owning and especially driving a Porsche, for instance through the beautiful Alps or through the beautiful Côte d'Azur, the Blue Coast in France, and especially through my beloved Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and my beautiful Basque Country. I just would like to end up with this idea, so I invite you to have a reflection on this, because we all have a passion and different passions, each of us, and I think that's part of our divine nature and unique nature as unique individuals, human beings, and souls. And that brings us to the end of the presentation, guys, to this long and also exhausting presentation and video, at least for me, being honest with you guys. And I just would like to conclude by highlighting the general idea that at the end of the day, we all are fully free to choose what's the perspective on life and also of ourselves that we embrace. And we are always free to choose the beliefs that we hold onto. Of course, these aspects are very important and they have major implications for our life and all of our experiences. So I just would like to end by emphasizing this idea that we all are fully free and we always have the power to choose either to become and to be fully responsible for the totality of our life. And when I use the term totality, I literally mean it, or also buying into a certain degree of victimhood. And there's no judgment on my part. We are all free, and I think that's the beauty of this universe and this human experience, right? That we all are free to make this choice, and we all make these kind of choices, either consciously or not. And I just invite you to make a conscious choice. And that's the last idea that I wanted to highlight and share with you guys. So thank you very much, especially for staying with me during such a long video. And stay tuned, because with the term totality of our life, I think I have already given you a small hint about the topics that I will be covering in the next videos. That will be, of course, topics that might have a considerable weight in our respective lives. But of course, I will be always analyzing them from the framework I have just presented and shared with you. And I think that it has already been clear what's the framework that I align with and identify with. So thank you very much, and see you in the next videos.